today. My name is Ivana Teixeira. I'm an anthropologist and postdoc fellow at Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, Brazil. And together with my colleagues, we're really very pleased to host the sixth seminar. The Embodied Inequalities of the Anthropocene initiative is a collaboration between medical anthropologists at UCL in UK, Speciesist in Oaxaca, Mexico, and the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. We had different researchers talking in the 6 seminars, or 5 until today. In the first seminar, we talked about plastic and toxicity with Heather Davis from the New School in New York. In the second seminar, we talked with Elizabeth Roberts from the University of Michigan about the development of bioethnography, talking about lead in Mexico City. In the third seminar, we had Renzo Tadei from Federal University of São Paulo, talking about the participation of indigenous knowledge in understanding the Anthropocene. In the fourth seminar, we had the indigenous leader and thinker Dario Kopenawa dealing with the harmful effects of illegal mining in the Yanomami lands. And in the seminar before this one, we received Professor Francisco Vergara Silva talking about the conquest of Mexico and the Anthropocene. So today, it's a real pleasure to welcome and listen to Professor John Segata talking about agribusiness and the pandemic, locating this phenomena in the context of Anthropocene. I would like just to say to those who are watching the lecture that you can turn on the closed captions in Zoom for an English transcription or for a translation to Portuguese or Spanish. Professor Jean, thank you once again for being with us, and we're ready to listen to you. You have like 40 minutes, and after we'll do a few rounds of questions.
Okay, thank you, Ivana. Thank you so much for introducing me, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm trying to put the presentation. Yeah, can you see? Yeah, so I want to thank my friends from UCL and CSS for this wonderful invitation, and thank all of you for attending this talk. And yeah, I'm glad to speak to you this afternoon, and I hope we have fruitful conversations. Well, during the first year of COVID-19, I have been focused on analyzing the social impacts of the pandemic on meat processing workers in southern Brazil. What drew my attention at the time was the high number of cases that exacerbate pre-existing issues in this type of industry. The meat processing chain is a catalyst for structural violence, inequalities, precarious, racialized, and speciesist work. Also, it's one of the most importantly responsible for the intensive production of unhealthy ecologies that feed emerging pathogens. This strong arm of agribusiness, whose activities didn't stop even during the most critical moments of the pandemic, is actually the protagonist of a set of chronic destruction that exploits and sickens humans, animals, and environments at the same time. From this starting point, I began to ask myself, how does the way we have been eating feed the end of the world? To answer this question, I will present a syndemic and multi-species analysis of the structural violence that connects social, environmental, and health crises. In the medical anthropology of Marius Singer and Barbara Hilkebauer, syndemics is the adverse synergistic interaction of two or more diseases or other health conditions promoted or facilitated by social and environmental conditions. I don't know if you can read, because for me our CAMS is in front of the slide. No, it's okay for you to see? Yeah, okay. While structural violence refers to often hidden ways that structures of inequality, such as poverty, racism, and discrimination, negatively impact the lives and well-being of affected populations. In addition, the multi-species analysis by anthropologists Eben Kirksey and Stephen Helmreich, for instance, allows to expand the idea of the affected population beyond humans. So animals, microorganisms, plants, minerals, soil, and the atmosphere are included alongside humans, each with their legible biographies and political protagonisms. I begin by describing the relationship between meat consumption and the pandemic from two very different contexts: the possible origin of the virus in China's wet markets and the circulation and contamination of the virus in the slaughterhouses of southern Brazil. My purpose is to show how the overvaluation of exotic narratives concerning the consumption of wild animals obliterate the way in which agro-industrial capitalism operates the machinery of sickness and destruction. In the second part of my presentation, I address how unhealthy ecologies and the embodiment of precarization are shaped by environmental and labor deregulation and the simplification of life. This kind of issue form the lucrative basis of agribusiness. My purpose is to show how global markets drive the industrialization and standardization of fresh foods, which are obtained from the combination of genetic modification that make animals and environments vulnerable, and repetitive movements that destroy the bodies of human workers and the production lines. In addition, I explain how agribusiness reproduce in new configurations the historic and devastating social, sanitary, and environmental conditions that have affected Brazil since colonial times. I end this talk by suggesting that rather than declaring war on pathogens, what we need is policies of joint care for humans, animals, and the environment. My argument is that the pandemic is a multiple, unequal event that surpasses pathogen-centric global narratives, because socioeconomic, cultural, political, and environmental distinctions stress risk, disease, and care homogeneity. The point is that viruses alone don't make a pandemic. A more or less contingent entanglement establishes favorable conditions for events like this to take shape and gain intensity. Agri-food production and distribution chain on a global scale form, in this presentation, a prominent example of this scenario of destruction. So I will start talking about bat soups and chicken wings. I'm sure all of you remember early in 2020 when an outbreak of an unknown species of pneumonia began to spread rapidly from the city of Wuhan and central China. At the time, an original narrative emerged, shaping an imagination of the pandemic. The infection for this kind of fault was supposed to have started with the consumption of the meat of some wild animals, sold in cities' wet markets. Seafood, snakes, civets, pangolins, all were suspect of enabling the virus to spill over from the wild to civilization. But the speculation gained many versions, but it was the image of bat soup. This is a bat soup, yeah, as the original source of the pandemic that gained the world's attention. However, while the concerns of certain global health technocrats were focused on the exotic eating habits that largely fueled their moral narratives about health risks and civility, another story involved the pandemic and meat consumption was gaining ground in public opinion. Plants in the global meat processing industry were linked to numerous outbreaks of contamination by the novel coronavirus in countries like United States, Germany, and Brazil. In the case of, in the states of Rio Grande do Sul, where I live and where I did the research, the official numbers were 7,693 confirmed cases of COVID-19 among workers, only among workers in the meat processing industry in one pandemic year between March 2020 and March 2021. In June 2020, this number came to represent 32% of the cases in the entire state, that 1/3 of the contingent of those infected. This suggests that working with meat accounted for a large part of internalization of disease in the state at the onset of the pandemic. Brazil cannot stop. This is a jargon widely repeated by the former President Jair Bolsonaro, was faithfully followed by this sector. But this led to serious consequences. Let me bring you an example. I work 3 days with a fever of over 38 degrees. It was COVID. That is what Nelson told me in WhatsApp messaging. I couldn't stop. If the person in charge discovered someone was sick, he'd send them home because there are protocols, right? But when you are at home, the money doesn't come in. The company discounts everything. So we had to go to work even now in the danger. I wasn't the only one sick. People disguise it, you know. We took medicine to lower the fever and cheat the temperature checkers. You have to keep hustling. Nelson was a meat packer. He worked in a deboning line of a meat processing plant in one of many small towns in the interior of southern Brazil that runs the operation of corporations headquartered in the United States. He talked a few minutes remotely and even thought he was considered a case of recovery. The infection that hit him 6 months before we chatted was still showing its strength. I still feel a pain in my chest, some suffocation, something awful. but now I'm used to it. According to him, many people were infected and still suffer from persistent symptoms. I have some workmates who become very sick. Lots of people come from abroad and work seasonally. They share a house and all sleep together, huddle together. Everyone got COVID. Some are still bothered by shortness of breath, poor sleep, and strong headaches. The thing hit us hard. 2020 was very hard. Indeed, 2020 was very busy. It was a record year for the meat industry in Brazil. Including poultry, pork, and beef cattle, the country increased exports by approximately 10%, raising the country to first position in the world ranking of meat production. It's the second in the case of the cattle meat. But if you add poultry, pork, and beef or cat, Brazil is the first one now. All of this was thanks to increased individual work goals over time and fewer breaks, including restriction on toilet use, which meant Nelson and other workers didn't drink water, so they would not feel like peeing. But there are more reasons why 2020 was a hard year. Having been off the world hunger map for at least 2 decades, Brazil was once again haunted by the food insecurity, which the world came to know about through images of people fighting over bones. This scenario further aggravated the situation of vulnerability during the pandemic due to malnutrition. It turns out that, in contrast to the increase in production and export rates exalted by agribusiness, economic research has shown how a staggering increase in the price of the basic food basket, particularly beef, took food away from Brazilian plates during the pandemic. Currently, 33 million people are hungry in Brazil. Such ambivalence shows that the vocation of agribusiness isn't to produce food on a democratic scale, but rather to intensively produce money and sickness. Nelson and so many thousands of workers in the sector are subject to dying of viruses and hunger while producing food to feed the stock market and fortunes of the lords of agro-industrial empire. Furthermore, while global public opinion was focused on exotic food practices, the unhealthy mainstream meat corporations maintain their business as usual. I say this because it's necessary to emphasize that food preferences in China go way beyond civets, pangolins, or bat soups. The country is one of the biggest importers of beef produced in Brazil. The commercial volume is so robust that it accounted for more than 1/4 of the country's beef production and more than a half of pork productions in 2020. Due to the outbreak in Wuhan, Brazilian politicians, you know about I am talking, Brazilian politicians felt free to blame China for the origin of the pandemic. They demanded responsibility and raised suspicions of conspiracy. Meanwhile, a few batches of chicken wings contaminated with the virus combined with xenophobia and diplomatic malpractices have shown that there are even more toxic problems in these global markets. Amid disputes over the location of the virus, whether it was deposited on the packaging or directly on the surface of the chicken, the World Health Organization published a note saying the meat was safe to eat. However, the organization didn't comment on the exponential increase in COVID contamination in meat processing plants, which were publicly known for their precarious and unsanitary conditions. In other words, the World Health Organization came out in defense of chicken meat, but not the chicken meat workers, demonstrating that biosecurity policies protect commodities much more than people, animals, or the environment. In addition, the World Health Organization has guides to use of nomenclatures for viruses and infection coded with letters and numbers without geographical identification, as was the case of Spanish flu or Nile fever or Zika virus. At issue has been an attempt to mitigate the stigmatization and persecution of populations such as those that accommodate labels like Chinese virus in the case of COVID-19. But Robbie Wallace, who is interested in understanding the geographical origin of the certain virus strains, question this measure. While acknowledging the stigmatization potential, his criticism suggests that this measure is an attempt to disrupt epidemiological research through mapping the evolution and diffusion of pathogens to calm the moods of countries that benefit from large agribusiness corporations and that include the World Health Organization. Geography cannot be reduced to a political spatial demarcation. Geography involves the study of dynamics of occupation and appropriation of environments for humans or microorganisms, okay? There is robust evidence of an exponential emergence of pathogens in rapidly changing geographies, such as those harboring emerging large cities, monoculture crops, and livestock farming. According to Wallace, the geographical identification of the origin of a virus and its infection is a way of holding governments, nations, and corporations responsible when their actions favor the appearance of such viruses. Moreover, the author affirms a finer taxonomy would be even more preferable once the production plants where the outbreaks originate are identified. We could name the virus strains according to their corporate origins. Thus, instead of Gamma, Delta, or Omicron, it could be more appropriate to name the variant GBS, Tyson and Foods, Cargill, Smithfield, and so on. The point is that if meat processing plants cannot be considered all that safe for their human workers, the animals, or even the environment, it is evident that the massive exposure of Chinese wet markets as responsible for the emergence of virus is merely a tactic to divert attention from the responsibilities of the large-scale meat industry. Are you tired? Oh. I'm in a half part, okay. Passando a boiada. The recording of a meeting that brought together the ministers of the federal government in May 2020 exposed the intricacies of the destructive political arrangement we was living on Brazil, I hope. In one of the most scandalous scenes, the then Minister of the Environment, Ricardo Salles, praised the fact that they face an opportunity to pass infra-legal reforms of deregulation and simplification that whole worlds demand, while the press turned its attention to the pandemic. I'm sorry, but I will show these guys and I will repeat his words. So to do this, we need to make an effort here while we are in this moment of tranquility in terms of press coverage, because they are only talking about COVID and get on with passando a boiada and changing all the regulations and simplifying norms from IFAM, from the ministry. IFAM is an institute of the patrimony, from the Ministry of Agriculture, from the Ministry of the Environment, from the Ministry of this, from the Ministry of that. Now it's the time to join forces to push through simplification. It's regulation that we need in all aspects. As I have shown, the meat processing industry in southern Brazil is one of the sectors where the boiada está passando. Accidents and injuries, psychiatric disorders, contamination by chemical substances, illness caused by immune vulnerability and the exploitation of the labor force of migrants and indigenous people have provided strong evidence of the risks involved in this activity. Also, the high rate of COVID among its workers shown how much the meat chain favors the circulation of, exposure to, and contamination by virus. However, the emergence of new pathogens comes into play in this set, considering the toxic effects of agribusiness on local ecologies and global ecosystems, which includes deforestation for crops and pastures, reduced biodiversity, water pollution, and the emission of more than 7 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year in the atmosphere. As I told you, Rob Wallace's body of work on agribusiness underlines how significantly the industry is responsible for generating environments favorable to the scale production of new pathogens and for removing immunological obstacles that could delay the transmission of a new disease because of the transformation of animals into raw material based on genetic monocultures. In this industrial model, for example, pigs need to grow evenly so they can be exploited as labor in agro-industrial capitalism. This is about standardization in the food industry. That is, there can be no discrepancy between the amounts of fat and muscle because product uniformity is a quality factor. However, the production lines of meat processing plants also require standardization. The carcasses must be of adequate size and weight to circulate on conveyor belts and hooks, requiring the same movements at the time intervals when handled by human workers. Herds are genetically modified and exposed to same controlled environmental conditions on farms, using the same food compounds for their nutrition. Thus, they can become components that are only perfectly adapted to industrial lines, but also to the capitalism demands of commodity standardizations and the preference of those who consume their bodies converted into meat. It is the simplification of life implied in the emerging rationality synthesized, in the advertising slogan of Brazilian media, Agro is tech, agro is pop, agro is everything. It promises to feed an increasingly populous and hungry world, when in truth, it expands the profit scales of capitalism with crops optimized by a combination of genetic enhancement and precarious human and animal labor. In Porcopolis, anthropologist Alex Blanchett analyzes how the queue lines of meatpacking plants in southern United States shape the bodies of Latino migrants through painful and repetitive work. Workers become specialized to deal with certain parts of the pig carcass, which begins to shape the traumas that manifest themselves in their bodies. In other words, humans, pigs, and capitalism merge along the queue lines as human workers do embody the human workers embody the commercial anatomy of pigs and industrial capitalism through the desirable repetitive motions that favor the standard design of the cut of meat of its production lines. Furthermore, the author shows us how the medical departments that serve meat processing plants leverage human and swine work through the animalization of both. Medical examinations that identify occupational trauma and classify human workers' body into tendons and muscles that helps the industry make decisions concerning the skills that combine the strength of human and pig physicalities in the queue and cutting lines. In his words, this processes marks a situation where decades of efforts to wring more veil from the porcine bodies are now doubling back to remake how the human body is marshaled as an industrial site of a new money. But it's not just humans who are poorly positioned in their aptitudes that get in the way of the scale production process. As I told you, misaligned pigs are a problem for meat processing plants. It is akin to wanting to assemble an SUV car in a compact car production plant. You know, its housing doesn't fit on the tracks and its assembly is unfeasible. This is the reason that the standardization of animals begins with genes. Currently, just 3 breeds of pigs and 2 genetic matrices of chicken account for more than 90% of world consumptions. I'm sorry, but the chicken we have here is the same chicken you have in Mexico or in UK. This is the same genetic chicken. So it turns out that this type of homogenization exposes entire herds to potential mass contaminations, requiring the administration of high doses of antibiotics. So their already short-lived spans endure until slaughter, and they do not succumb to disease beforehand. The job of veterinarians in this sector is often reduced to responding to the ambivalent demand to keep animals alive long enough to gain the weight that guarantees a profitable death. But the digestive system of these animals, especially pigs, doesn't fully metabolize the complex of drugs and supplements they consume, causing part of these pharmacological residues to be eliminated in their feces and urine. An example also discussed by Blanchett's ethnography is illustrative and corresponds to the Brazilian reality. This is a pound. Pounds around confined farming receiving manure from pigs. They also receive high doses of antibiotics and other substances not processed by the pig's digestive system. The intense sun causes the liquid part formed of manure and urine to evaporate, carrying with it the residual drug particles. When it rains, they reach human and other animal population in these regions and settle directly inside their bodies by crossing the porous borders of the skin. The dry part of the manure left in the pounds turns into dust that scatters on the wind and settles in the lungs when workers and neighbors of these corporations when they breathe. The Brazilian case is even more worrying since some pig farms are positioned over the ponds, causing that manures that falls into the water to be eaten by fish raised in confinement, reusing the same feed twice to optimize inputs and amplifying profits. Shortly, the meat industry intersects racism and speciesism. Some humans, especially Black people and immigrants, and some animals are both precarious workers exploited by agri-food capitalism. They share situations of intense exploration and suffering. Humans have to deal with waste, viscera, in production lines that involve very low, shallow temperatures and accidents with sharp objects. In turn, animals like pigs work for this corporation on a full-time basis, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Pigs don't rest. They need to intensively eat the feed that is positioned in the feeders in front of them and wield muscles and fat in the shortest time possible to be recognized as employers of the month. Yeah, the pig's surplus value is bacon. In addition, many of human workers at meat packing plants in Rio Grande do Sul who were infected by the novel coronavirus are also young Black people, migrants from Venezuela, Haiti, and Senegal. Others are indigenous people who moved from their territories already destroyed by the expansion of agribusiness to find work in these corporations under extremely precarious conditions. These situations maintain certain parallels with the colonial times and regimes of slavery. Southern Brazil has a long history with the meat industry. The state of Rio Grande do Sul was a powerful international pole of the beef jerky industry in the 19th century, sustained by slave labor. Numerous workers based on archival research provide evidence that not only did slavery exist, but that is yes, because white people didn't deny this, yeah. But that is one of the cruelest forms of slavery in Brazil, since the wounds on the slave's body resulting from constant punishment were exposed to the salt used to dry the meat, producing continuous torture while they worked. Moreover, medical records of the period showed that the huge pieces of salted meat also intensified the precarious work conditions, causing serious back problems. In other words, in the words of the chroniclers, a good side of jerk should be like a prison. In addition, environmental degradation was rife, described as rivers of blood and viscera and clouds of putridness, in reference to untreated waste of this industry. To say nothing of cholera that contaminated slaves who work barefoot in dirt water, tuberculosis that spread in their damp, collective dormitories, and contamination with bubonic plague resulting from the contact with contaminated rats that traveled on the trains that transport the cattle, jerky, and tawny leather between Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. In summary, in the past and present, exploitation, precarious, racialized, and speciesist work, the production of unhealthy ecologies and pandemics seem to be inordinately associated with the meat processing industry. So to conclude, the intersection of agribusiness-based food systems, health, and global ecological crisis requires the adoption of a multi-species approach. The destructive exploitation of humans, animals, and environments is not a phenomenon separate from the broader process of structural violence. It materializes in the historical degradation of environments through extractivism and transformation of nature into commodities, and the nutrition model of carnism, which increasingly demands the creation and slaughter of animals on a scale that guarantees the supply of international markets eager for protein consumption. Both cases rely on infrastructure based on degrading work and exposure to numerous forms of contamination, which is why we must think less about war on pathogens and more about forms of coexistence and joint care policies for humans, animals, and environments. Viruses do not appear alone. They are the result of centuries of planetary destruction and exploitation. Social, environmental, and health crises are not isolated events, and the COVID is yet another evident manifestation. The pandemic took shape and gained intensity within the harmful combination of political and corporate agents, the dismantling of social policies, and historical relations of power and inequalities that act with the virus in the creation of environments of risk and vulnerability. So, the situation in the meat industry in southern Brazil during the pandemic echoes and materializes what Ulrich Brandt and Marcus Wissing call the imperial mode of living, the idea that everyday life in the capitalism center is essentially made possible by shaping social relations and society-nature relations elsewhere, by means of unlimited access to labor power, natural resources, and sinks. Likewise, for the modern ideals of freedom and autonomy exercised at the center of the exploitation of material resources in another place. When Nelson told us that he worked with a fever, sick with COVID, in a meat processing plant in a country that broke sports records in the same year it was relisted on the World Hunger Map, there can be not a doubt. We, especially in Latin America and in other low-income countries, we are the other place. We are the elsewhere. The fact is that if yesterday it was the devastating process of colonization and expropriation that raised local populations and natural landscapes, today It is genetic manipulation technologies that convert the poorest countries into large, profitable plantations of transgenic crops and confined animal farming. Together with large, chaotic metropolis, industrial complexes, they also form scuds and wounds that expose us to high degrees of risks and vulnerability, the hotspots of the Anthropocene, yeah? In broader terms, these unequal borders on segregated bodies in the midst of precarious ecologies highlight the role of racial capitalism that drives migrants, Black and Indigenous people to disproportionate degrees of porous contact with potentially contaminating substances and situations. It is the material form of structural violence that silently intersects and embodies the Anthropocene and its racial, class, and species hierarchies. Shortly, the end of the world, the end of the world come first for us living on peripheries. For Pierre Charbonnier, the Anthropocene reveals a material history of freedom based on achievement of emancipation through the accumulation of energy and material sources that result from the conversion of nature into an exploited resource. As Charbonnier sums it up, freedom is a fossil fuel. In addition, I would say freedom is also meat, soybean, and precarious work. Quoting the indigenous activist Ailton Krenak, if agri is tech, agri is pop, agri is everything, then this calamity that we are experiencing on the planet today can present its bills to agri. I agree, and I highlight we must question more incisively the role of the agri in the cultivation and intensive breeding of disease and degradation. Agribusiness promises to feed a hungry planet, but it doesn't. Agribusiness fuels the end of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean, for this extremely interesting talk. Are we going to do the discussion in Portuguese or in English? What do you prefer, Jean?
Oh.
Okay, let's start with the questions. You can ask questions in the chat or on the microphone. You can also ask in Portuguese or in Spanish. Who would like to start?
I think Kat is.
Yeah. Hey, I thought that was such a great talk, and I'm so glad we're going to get to hear you speak again soon. UCL. But I just wanted to ask, what difficulties, or I shouldn't say difficulties, but how have you found the experience of discussing your research in Brazil, in your region? Because I find that, you know, when you're talking about animal agribusiness, like, yeah, I feel like there's a certain, when it's a national industry, right, you get these kind of, it's a point of pride, right? Like Denmark's got a whole thing about their pork, and I guess I'm wondering, it's like, is there space in Brazil to have that conversation about the colonial origins or the exploitation involved and the, you know, the deleterious impact? Or does it get crowded out by more like, this is a huge, you know, export for us and it's a point of pride? Mm-hmm. Or I'm just wondering how, if that makes sense, how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I will answer in English, maybe in Portuguese, but there is the translation. Yeah, this is a really good question, Kat, because, well, Firstly, we have increased the agribusiness in Brazil last 2 or 3 decades, and this is a kind of the first step is to think about this is a kind of a new industry in Brazil. So there is a singular way to consider agribusiness in this case, because yeah, it's true that we live under a colonial problem, especially on extractivism during 4 centuries, and it's like to say that Brazil produces raw material to European countries produce something in their industries. But the turn now is the Brazil consider that the raw material is its own industry. We are an industry of raw material, not a kind of space to be exploited for the other industry, but we are the industry of these things. So this is a kind of new extractivism. This is a really interesting problem that, like Brazil, superpower the empowered the extractivism in favor for it, but not totally in favor, because there is a price. People are living better than 20 years ago, but the environment is totally destruction comparing to 10 or 20 years ago. So this is one point. The second point is totally complicated to fight against the narrative that we need the agribusiness to feed a hungry world. So every time people say, but we need to eat something, so we need to do this kind of process. And this is a point that a lot of researchers in Brazil are saying that Brazil stopped to encourage local circuits of the production. So local agriculture or familial or agriculture, instead to improve only the large scales industry. So for me, or in the kind of this presentation, this is the main problem we need to ask, because this large chain is based in fossil fuel to transport the things, requires genetic modification of the raw materials, especially because this material needs to travel for long distances, and they need to keep on the supermarkets a long time. So to do this, we must produce some simple materials like soybean. With soybean, we can do meat, we can do milk, we can do a lot of profitable things. So this is the way of the produce a destruction and to improve the contamination, because we have because the monocultures don't have ways to stop some contaminations. And so third, is too complicated to talk about this, because we have in Brazil a large class of politicians based or on agribusiness chain. So there is, like we talk about in Brazil, we have a bancada da bala. This is the deputies of guns, supported by guns industry. The Pentecostal bancada, there is a evangelical politicians and the agribusiness politicians. We have basically three types of the politicians in Brazil. So this is a totally toxic combination for the emergence of the fascism, the violence, and the environmental and social destruction. So it's not comfortable talk about agribusiness in Brazil, especially because Brazil sold for other countries the image is an emergent country based in agribusiness. So, and because the forces of this kind of politicians.
Okay, that's good for you, Catriona. We have Sarah. No?
Great, thanks. Thanks, Jan. That was fantastic. So many things to think through and think with. So it's really, thank you for that. So I just want to pick up on two things. So one was this very interesting discussion about the sort of the embodiment, if you like, of the commercial anatomy of the pigs by the workers. And I found that really fascinating. I think this is Alex Blanchett's discussion as well. But I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, because it really was really fascinating to think about this question of embodied inequalities and the workers, the work that has to be done in the slaughterhouse that sort of somehow becomes an embodiment of that kind of commercial capitalism. So but that was my first question. And the second question was, I mean, I'm sort of very interested to know whether there is even a discussion in Brazil at the moment about cultured meat, and whether that, so there's the meat that can be cultured in laboratories kind of settings. So it sort of removes, or does it? I suppose the question is, does this remove the sort of plantation model? It's obviously a hugely attractive capitalist kind of model that's being kind of getting a lot of attention at the moment. But I just wondered to what extent it challenges or reproduces some of those plantation speciesist kind of frameworks, and whether it's even a topic of discussion in Brazil. I mean, the idea of cultured meat as a kind of industry alternative to feed the world, as we're told, as well. So yeah, those are just a couple of queries.
I'm sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your questions. So good. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer totally in English, but this point of the intersects the body of pigs, the body of workers, but human workers and pig workers. So this is the point. Is for me is a central thing that we can discuss in our project, like embodied inequalities, why we can see, or why we can map this embodied situations of the climate change or the capitalism and other things. So there is really interesting, because when we did fieldwork in the slaughterhouses, there is a point that Alex Blanchett shines about United States situation, but it's like in Brazil. People, I will continue in Portuguese, because I'm sorry. Quando a pandemia começou, uma das primeiras medidas foi considerar algumas populações como de risco prioritário, né? Pessoas com mais de 60 anos, a população indígena, por exemplo, para citar alguns casos. Bom, o que acontece? Apenas uma dessas indústrias da carne que nós acompanhamos, só uma delas tinha 502 indígenas trabalhando. Na região noroeste do Rio Grande do Sul, numa cidade chamada Passo Fundo. Bom, quando eles foram considerados grupo de risco, eles não eram trabalhadores que tinham uma segurança social em termos de trabalho, direito, né, de trabalho. Então, eles foram afastados e sem remuneração, simplesmente foram afastados. E, bom, eles precisavam, então, fazer outras atividades, foram trabalhar em outros setores, colheita da maçã, colheita de outras plantações, e os trabalhadores que estavam já empregados nessa mesma indústria precisaram aumentar o ritmo de trabalho. Para você ter uma ideia, eles devem tirar os ossos ou cortar, né, um frango, né, são 13 frangos por minuto. Tá? Durante a pandemia, eles tiveram que aumentar para 15 frangos, depois tiveram que aumentar para 17 frangos, porque eles precisavam compensar o trabalho dessa população que foi dispensada naquele momento. A dispensa dessa população já é um problema para ela, mas também criou essa situação, ou seja, havia, né, um mercado mais ávido pela carne e, ao mesmo tempo, o número de trabalhadores diminuiu. Então, quando eu digo que aumentou em 10% a produção, né, durante um período em que muita gente parou de trabalhar, você pode imaginar o quanto que esses mesmos movimentos precisavam ser feitos. Então, esses pedaços de carne, essas carcaças, sejam de porcos, ou sejam de frangos, ou seja de gado, elas passam por esteiras que não param na frente dessas pessoas. Então, assim, elas precisam executar os mesmos movimentos com a mesma velocidade durante todo o dia. 17 frangos por minuto, você imagine. É claro que você passa a corporificar a anatomia comercial dessa carne. Quando eu digo anatomia comercial desses animais, porque não é a anatomia do animal como um ser vivo, é a anatomia do corte da carne. Ou seja, tem gente que é especializada em colocar a faca perto do osso e fazer esse movimento, né? Ou seja, é nesse ponto que o Blanchett traduz um pouco essa ideia de corporificar, né, essa anatomia do animal, porque você passa a adquirir dores, né, que sintetizam ou que corporificam em você a anatomia dessa peça de carne que está na sua frente. A gente pode perceber esse tipo de corporificação também em uma série de outras atividades que talvez a gente não olhe com esse tipo de atenção, mas como é que eu posso dizer para vocês? A própria situação da constante exposição tanto aos resíduos biológicos quanto aos resíduos químicos, que passam a dar forma à qualidade da nossa respiração, do nosso batimento cardíaco e de todo o funcionamento dos nossos órgãos, né? Então, a gente passa, digamos assim, a corporificar, né, uma série de limites e potencialidades que são dadas por esse ambiente de trabalho que vai produzindo aquilo que eu me lembro da própria nossa colega Jeannie Ganley falando, né, opera uma violência lenta sobre, né, sobre os nossos corpos, porque vão dando essa forma, ou seja, né, a quantidade de determinado produto que entra em contato com a minha pele ao longo dos anos vai limitando as funções do meu corpo, ou seja, né, eu vou corporificando essa relação com o ambiente tóxico e assim por diante. A segunda questão, me perdoe, deixa eu me lembrar. Por favor, Sarah.
Obrigada, Jean. It was about cultured meat and whether that, I don't know whether that discussion is kind of present in Brazil at the moment, or and whether, you know, what kind of positionality we might think through, I guess, in relation to cultured meat, and whether it challenges some of the you know, kind of plantation speciesist models, or reproduces them in different sorts of ways as well.
Yeah, but
em português, se quiser.
Ok, obrigado, Sarah. É que eu não sei como te dizer exatamente isso, mas se formos levar bem a sério o que se faz no Brasil, a gente cultiva carne. Esse modelo industrial de produção, ela só não é feita no laboratório, ela é feita numa escala maior. Mas as granjas de cultivo, de criação de porcos e de frangos, elas têm níveis de segurança que são similares de laboratórios. É muito difícil, inclusive, você conseguir fazer trabalho de campo onde esses animais são criados, porque nós somos considerados espécies altamente contaminantes para esses rebanhos, né? Entrar numa granja de frangos é o risco de sucumbir toda aquela granja, porque algum deles pode se contaminar, a genética é a mesma. Então, em certa medida, a gente tem um cultivo de carne realmente artificial, sabe? Ele tem uma forma animal lá que eu acho que é só a única coisa que incomoda essa indústria e que incomoda o humor, inclusive, né, de quem milita em relação aos direitos animais e assim por diante, porque a única coisa que a modificação genética e a forma operacional da indústria que atua nesse tipo de criação, a única coisa que eles não conseguiram tirar foi a anatomia desses animais, porque o resto tudo eles já tiraram. Esses frangos não conseguem caminhar sequer muito distantemente, porque eles são feitos para sentar e comer e ganhar peso e ganhar um peito bastante grande, sabe? E coisas assim. Então, por isso que eu disse, eu acho complicado de responder, porque sim, há alguns projetos, a gente tem a indústria brasileira de pesquisa pecuária, que é a Embrapa, né, que tem projetos sobre, por exemplo, cultivo, entre aspas, artificial, né, de proteína, né, baseado, obviamente, em genética animal, etc., mas sem ter uma forma animal. Mas são processos muito caros. E a gente está falando de uma indústria que se preocupa muito mais com a lucratividade do que com o bem-estar animal, com o bem-estar ambiental das pessoas e assim por diante. Então, é como se eu dissesse para você, o agronegócio no Brasil criou um jeito barato de produzir animais artificialmente, que é um pouco nesse sentido. Então, eu acho que talvez moralmente, né, não ter a anatomia do animal seja algo que agrade, né, muito, mas na prática, né, o que se faz é uma produção artificial. É um processo talvez seria um processo talvez maior de se esconder essa coisa toda, como a etnografia de uma antropóloga francesa chamada Noélie Vial, trata muito bem sobre os abatedouros no eu não sei, Andorra, não sei como fala em inglês, país de, não lembro, Andorra, entre Espanha e França e Itália, né, pequeno país. Bom, o que aconteceu? Até os anos 70 era muito comum nos açougues, né, nas lojas de carne, você vender as peças de carne com a anatomia dos animais. É o que acontece ainda na Espanha, por exemplo, com o presunto, né? Você tem a anatomia da perna, por exemplo. Esse processo, moralmente, ele incomodava muito a população, ou uma parcela da população que não queria comer algo que tivesse a anatomia de um animal. Então, ela mostra todo esse processo de invisibilização da anatomia dos animais, colocando para longe os abatedouros e trazendo de lá as carnes com uma anatomia comercial, bifes e etc., cortados dentro de bandejas com papel absorvente para que aquele líquido que se parece sangue não, né? Então, né, um processo dos anos 70 que já traduzia um pouco isso, ou seja, né, esconder que nós estamos lidando com animais.
Obrigada.
Eu que agradeço.
Thank you very much, Jean, Sarah. Someone else? If not, I can ask you.
Yeah.
I speak in Portuguese also. I take advance of our discussions. Jean, eu queria...
I'm sorry.
Ivana, you've muted. There we go.
Desculpa.
Yes, no, yeah, but cut your sound. Yeah.
Sorry. Eu gostaria justamente de tocar nisso que traz esse trabalho da Noélie Viale, eu não sei também como ela é francesa, e eu estava pensando nisso que se tem discutido sobre esse distanciamento que provoca um abatedouro, um matadouro, daquilo que é o amoral, né? Daquilo que é o pecaminoso nessa relação, que é essa predação cada vez mais assimétrica, né? Então, quando eu fiz esse campo no interior do Rio Grande do Sul agora, e circulei nesse primeiro contato nos níveis administrativos, quer dizer, né, conversei com o veterinário da prefeitura e conversei com alguns pequenos pecuaristas que fornecem pro abatedouro. E o que apareceu bastante, que aparece muito nesse discurso mesmo do pequeno criador, mesmo daquele que não tá tão preocupado com essa missão do colonialista do Brasil de alimentar o mundo. Mas ele está preocupado, claro, com o seu negócio, né? E vê nesse abatedouro uma espécie de local onde ele é eximido do ato de matar, né? Ele diz, olha, o abatedouro é ótimo porque você entrega o seu gado e tu não precisa fazer aquele trabalho pesado, sujo, difícil, que é sangrar esse animal. Então, eles me diziam, olha, antigamente a gente sangrava o animal em pé, quer dizer, palanqueava ele, né, amarrava as mãos, as patas dianteiras e traseiras, e uma pessoa especialista nesse ato, nessa técnica, colocava a faca, então, no pescoço, num lugar determinado, e dependendo muito do matador, né, esse animal ia sofrer mais ou menos. E é assim também dentro do matador. Só que, eles me disseram, era penível, porque primeiro que exigia muita força, exigia uma corporalidade muito agressiva desse sujeito que se prestava ao ato. E o animal precisava sangrar até desmaiar, porque eles só podiam cortar aquela carne depois que o sangue tivesse saído todo, porque o sangue é muito perecível, tem um gosto muito forte, então eles me explicavam isso. Então ele disse, então é maravilhoso porque tu entrega o boi ali, vivo, tranquilo, e eles te entregam a carne limpa. A gente não precisa se envolver. Então, esse espaço apareceu muito como o purgatório, quer dizer, o lugar onde tu vais evitar o purgatório, né? O lugar onde o lugar onde aquilo é, né? Esse espaço exime o criador da culpa, porque esse criador esse pequeno criador, né, as vacas deles, de todos os que eu visitei, são criadas na porta da cozinha. Eles têm um contato direto, diário, com esses animais, fisicamente falando. Então, eu fiquei pensando nessa polissemia do abatedouro, que para 90% da população é nefasto, mas que para uma pequena parcela, e eu não estou pensando nos grandes pecuaristas, né? Nesses do grande agrobusiness, estou pensando nesses pequenos, bem localizados, como essa cidade que é Jaguari, que é inclusive um pouco isolada geograficamente. Tal. Então, quer dizer, a mudança na natureza da relação humano-animal ali, né? Que se a predação antes era feita assim nesse corpo a corpo, quase que oferecendo uma cumplicidade entre o cara que mata e o animal que morre, né? E agora ele vai para esse espaço que limpa, que faz com que é nefasto, mas que para o criador tem esse significado, né? Então, essa polissemia do mal necessário, né? Então, eu queria saber se apareceu alguma coisa, se tu pensou alguma coisa sobre isso.
Não, primeiro, obrigado, Ivana, pela questão, e eu acho que ela toca em alguns pontos que são muito sensíveis, principalmente para quem estuda relações humano-animal há bastante tempo. Eu sei que também é o teu caso, talvez seja de outros colegas aqui, porque a gente está falando nesse sentido, a gente está falando realmente no ponto que você encerra a sua questão, numa mudança muito perceptível da relação entre humanos e animais em determinados contextos. E sim, eu não tive a experiência agora, neste momento da pandemia, com esse tipo de abordagem com pequenos agricultores, né, ou com pequenos criadores, mas a gente acaba fazendo um pouco de antropologia com a nossa própria história, muitas vezes. Eu sou alguém que cresci, que vivi os 20 primeiros anos da minha vida em um sítio, rodeado de outras pequenas fazendas, onde esse tipo de prática já passava justamente por esse processo de distanciamento da morte, né? Ou vamos assim dizer, dessa relação desproporcional, né, entre humano e animal que se dava, mas eu acho que no ponto em que eu estava, isso se dava muito em termos de intervenção de biossegurança mesmo, né? As agências de proteção sanitária passavam cada vez mais a operar como vigilantes e punidoras das práticas de abate caseiro de animais, sejam frangos, sejam porcos, sejam o gado bovino, né? Então, havia uma recomendação sanitária, ou seja, pequenos criadores podiam ser multados, né? Podiam ser punidos se matassem os seus animais em casa. Então, eles tinham que buscar o serviço de um abatedouro credenciado para fazer isso, né? Então, eu vi esse processo acontecer dessa forma, mas eu acho que ele diz muito sobre o quanto que políticas internacionais de saúde, né, por exemplo, interferem diretamente nas relações que nós temos com os animais e com os ambientes. E aqui está um exemplo muito fértil para a gente discutir. Primeiro, a própria ideia de biossegurança, né? Biosecurity interventions, elas costumam transformar a saúde num problema de segurança. Vocês devem ter percebido isso ao longo de toda a pandemia. A linguagem em relação aos vírus, aos migrantes, aos viajantes, né, a circulação é uma linguagem de segurança de fronteiras, é uma linguagem, né, que, digamos assim, é uma gramática que recupera o já recalcitrante modelo, como é que eu vou dizer para vocês, bélico, de pensar a relação de saúde. Inclusive, a gente usa constantemente uma gramática bastante de guerra, bastante bélica, para se referir à saúde. A gente faz campanhas, a gente luta contra o vírus, contra o inimigo, e, sabe, essas coisas todas que são, né, temos que enfrentar a doença, sabe? Então, esse já é um problema recalcitrante. Por que eu estou chamando de problema? Porque quando a gente trata saúde como uma questão de segurança, o que está em jogo é manter separado. Ou seja, eu tenho que ficar distante de vírus, eu tenho que ficar distante de fontes de vírus, por exemplo. Então, eu tenho que ficar longe da civeta, eu tenho que ficar longe das cobras, eu tenho que ficar longe do local de abatedouro dos animais, porque saúde, visto como segurança, ela implica numa política de afastamento das espécies, sabe? Né, de tratarmos como algo isolado para ter cuidado. O que eu estava reivindicando aqui é justamente o contrário, né? O que a gente precisa é políticas de aproximação, né? Porque se eu não me sinto parte, isso é conhecimento, como vou dizer, tradicional, dos intelectuais indígenas, inclusive Ailton Krenak, esse é o principal argumento dele. Se eu não me sinto parte da terra, se eu não me sinto parente mais do rio, se eu não sou mais filho da água, se eu não sou mais primo da cobra, todos esses seres, eles são matáveis, eles são objetificáveis, eles são destrutíveis, porque eles não fazem mais parte da minha relação enquanto relação afetiva, enquanto relação social. Eu me lembro, a minha mãe, ela criava gado, ela tinha vacas que produziam leite, a minha mãe fazia queijo em casa. Ela tentava me ensinar a tirar leite, eu era muito resistente, dizia que não. Mas eu me lembro muito bem, né, de situações como ela chamando para vem cá aprender a tirar leite. Então, ela tirando leite da vaca, a vaca calma, ela conversando com a vaca. É só mais um pouquinho, vamos tirar esse leite. Fazia carinho na vaca, chamava ela pelo nome. Havia uma relação de cumplicidade, de afetividade, de intimidade, de toque, né? Interespecífico, entre espécies. Chegou num determinado ponto que a minha mãe sentiu a necessidade de contribuir para a Previdência Social, porque ela precisava se aposentar. Então, para isso, ela resolveu registrar os seus queijos e vendê-los. Mas ela não conseguiu, porque a primeira medida da Agência de Segurança, né, em Saúde foi a de que minha mãe deveria tirar o leite das vacas com uma máquina. Ela não devia encostar na vaca, porque minha mãe era contaminante. Porque estar em contato é risco, é contaminação, é prejuízo. Então, para ela poder vender o leite, ela tinha que tirar o leite com uma máquina que ia diretamente para um recinto onde ele ficava estocado, que depois era levado para a empresa para ser pasteurizado. Ser pasteurizado significa matar todos os micro-organismos que estão nesse leite também. Então, veja o processo, né? Para ser saudável, minha mãe não podia mais encostar na vaca, não podia mais ter... Ela precisava ter uma relação hostil com a vaca, ela tinha que botar uma máquina para sugar o leite dela, né? Então, ela não podia mais chegar perto. O leite tinha que ser pasteurizado. A minha mãe fazia queijo de leite cru, como se faz na França, como se faz, né, em vários lugares. Não, a minha mãe não podia mais fazer queijo do leite cru. Precisava ser pasteurizado. Pasteurizar é como a Heather Paxson chama, é um processo de microbiopolítica, ou seja, é decidir a morte de outros seres, né? Um leite pasteurizado tem o mesmo gosto em qualquer lugar do mundo, tá, gente? Esse que é o ponto. Essa é a homogeneização. Se eu como uma mussarela de leite pasteurizado, bom, primeiro que ela não vai ter gosto, né? Se você comer a embalagem ou comer o queijo, não faz muita diferença, é quase a mesma coisa, não tem gosto de queijo. Tá? Mas assim, o que faz acontecer o gosto no queijo? É aquela festa de multiespécie que há nele. São os micróbios, digamos assim, que circularam pelas floradas das plantas e que trouxeram um pouco de planta para dentro daquele leite. São os micróbios que estavam em determinada temperatura, em determinada pressão do vento, é o tipo de solo, são as frutas que aquela vaca comeu, é o tipo de pasto, ou seja, né, um queijo, por exemplo, de leite cru, ele é isso, ele é um encontro multiespécie, sabe? Tem terra, tem ar, tem pressão atmosférica, tem flor, tem fruta, né? E tem uma colônia de pequenos seres que está fazendo aquilo dar sabor. O que eu faço? Eu mato tudo aquilo, né, para fazer o leite pasteurizado, porque isso é segurança, isso é saúde, sabe? Então, saúde transformada na ótica da biossegurança é sempre uma prática de guerra contra patógenos, contra micróbios, contra ambientes, quanto à intimidade que você tem com animais, é sempre uma política de afastamento. Ou seja, biossegurança é o extremo oposto do cuidado, né? Quando eu falo em cuidado em saúde, eu falo, né, na proximidade, no estar junto, na cumplicidade, etc. E aqui eu estou falando na separação. O segundo ponto é que a biossegurança também coloca tudo numa mesma panela, digamos assim, os problemas com terrorismo, os problemas com circulação de animais, de plantas, de patógenos, de migrantes, tudo é um problema de biossegurança. Como eu brincava na apresentação, né, ninguém sabe quem é que, assim, precisamos estar atentos, porque quem sabe aquele chinês que comeu a sopa de morcegos cruzou o planeta num avião e está sendo ele o contaminante, né, zero nesse momento, né? Ou seja, né, e aí ele é abordado na fronteira, né? Assim como um terrorista, ele pode estar carregando o coronavírus dentro do estômago dele, da última sopa de morcego que ele comeu, como ele pode estar com uma bomba amarrada no seu tórax, pronto para subir numa torre e causar uma explosão, né? Ou seja, as políticas de biossegurança, elas meio que fazem confundir saúde com terrorismo, com proteção de fronteira e, obviamente, com xenofobia, né? Porque os mais revistados, os mais historicamente sujos e contaminantes somos os latino-americanos, os africanos e os asiáticos, quando viajam para os países do norte. Potencialmente, nós somos contaminantes. Vocês sabem que nessa linguagem da biossegurança, o tempo todo se fala em ameaça global. Só que global significa Europa e Estados Unidos, a ameaça é o resto dos países. A gente viu isso acontecer com ébola. Quando o ébola saiu do continente africano, cruzou para a Europa, agora temos uma ameaça mundial ou global, né? Então, essa política que me incomoda bastante, mas que se torna bastante visível nesse tipo de situação, Ivana, voltando à tua questão mais diretamente, o quanto que essas políticas de cima para baixo, que tratam saúde como uma questão de segurança, interferem diretamente na relação que nós temos com as plantas, com os animais, etc. Eu vou dizer de uma outra forma, a médica das nossas crianças, das nossas meninas, disse outro dia, olha, elas têm que tomar remédios. Por quê? Porque elas vão para o playground do prédio e andam descalças na grama. Pisar descalço na grama ou na terra já é um problema de contaminação. Você não pode mais encostar no chão, nas plantas, nos outros animais, né, por uma questão de segurança. Ou seja, essa política de separação e de defesa, digamos, me incomoda bastante o quanto que ela interfere nessa relação que a gente tem com animais, plantas e ambientes.
Muito obrigada, Jean. Transformando a relação de predação numa relação de destruição, né?
Exatamente.
Well, we are finished the seminar. I don't know if someone else wants to say something. Maria Paula, do you know?
No, hello everybody. Thank you so much, Jean. Muito obrigada. It's very nice to hear you talking Portuguese as well. It's really inspiring, make me think many things. So I know I only comment on the chat that I was thinking about suffering as well, because we get distant from the suffering animal. As you, I grew up in the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul, so I grew up witness animals being killed, but like each animal that were going to be killed, it was not something banalized. It was something that reunited many peoples, and it was something that we shared all the meat and so on. So it's not something that it was done every day. So we grew up as well looking at the animals' eyes and looking at that and seeing that the animals were suffering. So I think this contact that you were pointing out is something that we missed in a way that make possible to banalize the death and the eating meat all the time. So yeah, I didn't want to take a lot of time, but that was one of my thoughts when listening to you. And many thanks for this. Really inspiring, really nice to listen to you in Portuguese as well. I think I think every immigrant or everybody that speak another language know that when we are talking or addressing very complex things, when we are doing that in our mother language, it's more powerful in some way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria Paula.
Thank you.
Yes, only to answer this point, but it's not the answer, but I agree with you. Yeah, when I lived in a farm, I remember, yeah, we kill some animals to eat, but there is a kind of completely ritual for this. It's not a banalized thing, because yeah, we have a total care for mitigate the suffering, but share this activity with the specialists, but the community, because we can eat a pig, all pig in our family, so we share some parts, and other Saturday or other month, we are into the neighborhood to do the same thing and share the parts of the pig. So there is a relation, like a cooler, like yeah, I try to improve our community sense, but mediated by the animals. And yeah, and after this, the kill lines only try to think on I don't know, like to say in English, bem-estar animal, well-being animal, yeah, I don't know, but especially focus it in the quality of textures of the meat, because if the animals suffer, the quality of the meat low. So yeah. It's not about the suffering, it's about the quality of the product that you are sell after kill this animal. So it's totally different, and yeah, so there we go.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sarah, I think you want to say something.
Yes, just very quickly before we close, what's been an amazing, fascinating seminar. Just two very quick announcements to say that we'll be holding our very, very final seminar of this year, probably likely in late June. And this will be a special seminar, publication or marking the publication of a special issue of Medical Anthropology Theory, a leading open access journal hosted by the University of Edinburgh. And this will be focused on the theme of embodied inequalities of the Anthropocene, organised by the project members here, and also bringing together others who are working in the Global South, including Latin America and the Caribbean. So we're really excited that it will be shortly in the open access format in Medical Anthropology Theory, and we look forward to announcing when that seminar when that will be publicised. We'll publicise and disseminate that probably in May sometime. And then finally, just to add that we're going to restart the seminar series in the autumn term, and we really look forward to having you involved with us then as well when we restart. So yeah, back to you, to Ivana, and thanks very much.
Well, thank you all. We are finishing this section today. Have a nice evening, and see you soon, my colleagues.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jan.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Jean.
Thank
Very
you.
much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Tchau, tchau, gente. Obrigado. Viu?
Ciao.